Hello, everyone. I'm John Higgins, contributing writer to Film and TV Now, and I'm delighted to welcome one and all to this very special interview with filmmaker Ben Charles Edwards, who's the writer and director of the new indie supernatural film Father of Flies, which has just completed its festival run at the online Paris International Film Festival 2022, which was held until the 20th of February, and it won 2 awards for Best Sound Mix and Best Score. Now, the film tells of a young boy's experience coming to terms with his father's new love while dealing with his own childhood issues. Ben, warm welcome to you. Congratulations on your awards at Paris, and congratulations on the film.
Great, thanks, John. Yeah, it's a surprise to see how well it's been received. So thank you.
Okay, so let's start off because you've based this film on your own childhood experiences. So how did you structure those memories into a screenplay for this Father of Flies?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it started from me. I directed a couple of films and produced films before I had written this one, and a good friend of mine, a journalist and a scriptwriter, said to me, Ben, if you're gonna undertake it, then base it on something you know. It's got to have something that you can connect to. And I thought, well, as a kid, I believe I grew up in a haunted house. I still do believe that, and I love horror films. So that was obviously the first step. And then I thought, well, my parents went through a divorce, and something I can connect to. And then the kind of story just came to me, loosely based on my childhood and my own experiences. But of course, I didn't have the same quite the same demise as all of that in the film.
Now, I was reading up on this. Now, like The Omen and The Exorcist, you've mentioned that there were some strange off-screen happenings. And I just wondered if you'd like to share some of those moments.
I can share some of them. I mean, a few I probably shouldn't, but we had the set exercised by a Catholic priest because 2 of the night security in New York wouldn't stay on the set in the evenings because they thought they had seen something. And there was a weird feeling on set. And then we had all sorts of other issues. Things went missing a lot. Things were moved around, which is very rare for a film's sake. Everything's accountable for. So when things are being moved to strange places, we found things up in the back of cupboards and things. It was like somebody didn't want us to film there. And of course, then it ended up with the sad passing of the lead actor, Nicholas Tucci, who died shortly after we filmed. But yeah, it was a strange film. There were so many assets and elements to it that seemed like it was never going to get finished. And I left it on an edit room shelf for 2 years. It was on hard drives. Sat in 2 different edit houses in London. Took everything back from New York, and it kind of just sat there. We played around with assemblies of it, and it just wasn't clicking with me for a long time, and it just seemed like bad luck. And then when Nicholas Tucci died, I had a long word with myself, and I just thought, you got to finish it. And we did, and then it kind of shifted up a gear, and then everything seemed to fall into place. And I think that sometimes things have to happen at the right time. And this is a good example of that. Everything fell into place when it was meant to.
Yeah. Well, obviously, you've just mentioned it because that was going to be my next question. I mean, you've dedicated the film to actor Nicholas Tucci, who plays the father, Richard. I mean, tell us a bit more about your experience of working with him. And I mean, were you aware of his health issues as you were filming?
No, I wasn't. He was such a professional. He rocked up every day on set in a great mood, great energy. And considering we were shooting a horror and it was a pretty dark vibe, we were shooting it in New York in the snow. It was January. It was -20 outside. It was blizzards. He arrived every day with a spring in his step and really did set a bar for all of us to kind of step up to every day. And a couple of the days that he wasn't on set because he wasn't needed, he wasn't shooting, he would still show up, which was lovely. He just wanted to kind of be there and be present. you know, it says so much about his character and of course where he was personally at that point for himself, and wanting to experience as much as he could. And truly, I'm just grateful and honoured that I had that time with him, and that the film got finished. And I've stayed in contact with his father, and yeah, I'm really proud. I'm proud that the film's worked out the way it has, and I think Nick would have been happy with it. I'm sure he would have criticised me and it and everything else, but he would have been happy with it.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about Nicholas, and you've given him a very sincere and very honest, very affectionate tribute. But let's talk about the rest of your cast, because they all, I mean, to be honest with you, as I mentioned in my review, I think it's one of the best ensemble sets of performances I've seen in a horror film in an age. It sort of, as I say, it takes me back to watching Poltergeist in the Amityville horror in their heyday. So tell us a bit more about them.
First of all, thanks for that compliment and comparison. I think you can overthink things when you're casting for a film, because it feels like the biggest deal in a movie, and of course it is to some degree. But essentially, I went with the best actors. I went with the best people that were available, that really loved the script, and a couple of them did some tapes. A couple of them I knew their work anyway. And they smashed it. And it didn't matter if they weren't the ideal that I had in my head, or I thought perhaps, I thought we would go with this kind of aesthetic to the character. It didn't matter. When those tapes came in and when I saw those performances, I knew exactly who it was we needed to go with. And Colleen Heidman, who plays Mrs. Starr, she came with such an offbeat kind of performance. It reminded me of the psychic from Poltergeist. There was something you couldn't quite put your finger on. And I loved that, because that character within the film was one of the only characters in the script that didn't have as much of a question mark over her head. But when Colleen brought herself to that performance, there was a big question mark, and it just made everything feel so much more unsafe in the story.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, let's talk a little bit about your production team. I mean, you said that this was sat on the shelf for 2 years. I mean, was this before COVID?
Yeah, we shot it just before COVID. Yeah.
And so how big was your production team? And in terms of the visual effects, the actual wonderful effects that you've got in there, that really, there's lots of booms and stuff like that. I mean, tell us about the production team.
It was the cinematographer is John Bretherton, who I've worked with across many different things. He was the camera operator on my first movie, Set the Thames on Fire, that we shot in London. And then we began to shoot some commercials and music videos over the years for Ridley Scott Association and Black Dog. And we developed a really strong working relationship. And John has such a unique aesthetic, but he also knows how to achieve things. And I have such a clear idea in my head of how things need to look. And because I came from a photographic background as well, I understand how it's possible and what's not possible, certainly on a budget or on a schedule. John's very good at kind of taking that and actually amping it up. He's a terrific DP. So he was a vital part. He came over to New York with us to film it, as did some of my art department team. Trinity Tristan was one of the art department girls that really brought a lot. So I kind of surrounded myself with familiar people, because when you go over to the States to shoot a movie, you're of course going to take a hell of a lot of local crew, which they have amazing selections of. But it was lovely to have that network around me that I knew I could trust and that got my aesthetic, and got what I was trying to do. Trinity I've known since we were children, so she knew exactly the story and she knew a lot about it. And then brought it back to London, and we got a great set of editors on it. Great composer Angus Havers, who in fact just won the best score at Paris, which was great. So yeah, I just surrounded myself with people that were far better than me at their specific role. That's why the film worked out okay, I think.
Yeah. So obviously, one of the things, the other award that it won aside from score, was about the sound. And I want to ask you about the sound design of the film. I mean, when you were starting out, did you have a specific in mind, or was that something that developed in production or in post?
I think it was a mixture of both. There were particular parts I remember hating the sound of loud noises as a child. I hated the Hoover being on. I hated this kettle that used to whistle, because it stemmed from after I watched the first Nightmare on Elm Street. And I remember my babysitter telling me not to watch it. I was too young. But of course, I thought, sure, I can do that. And I watched it and I was terrified. And for weeks afterwards, if there was a loud noise in my house, I thought, much like an animal, your senses aren't alert. I can't hear if someone's breaking into the house. So I built up this kind of fear of loud noises, including car alarms, the fire alarm in a house, burglar alarms, anything that was quite deafening would terrify me, because I thought I couldn't hear the monsters coming into the house. So in that sense, that was already there, which is why I wrote in a car alarm, why I wrote in the fire alarm, the kettle whistling. So there was that element. And also I hated submerging my head as a child in the bath, because again, you couldn't hear or couldn't see. So all of those things obviously played a part in the script and the sound design. And then Gus, Angus, and Will, who worked on the sound and the score from a very early stage when we got the first cut, they kind of took it and then they went to town with it and understood the importance and how much fun we could actually have with removing sound at particular points and playing with the boy's hearing aid and this tinnitus that he may hear in his ear. So it was a part of the script, but of course, like any part of the script, it needs to be executed particularly well, and that's always done in post.
Yeah, I mean, thinking of that actually brings back to my fear of shadows when I saw the original John Carpenter's Halloween. I mean, for ages I used to hide under the pillows because Michael Myers, because we had a stairwell at the top of our stairs in our very first house, and it was one of those things. But yeah, I mean, I can identify with that all the time. So
that's the beauty and importance of horror. It really sticks with you, doesn't it, when one resonates?
Definitely. So what do you feel that the horror genre offers that you can't achieve in other genres of filmmaking?
You can push it further. You can just push it further. Horror now, I mean, it's not all, a cheerleader getting stabbed by a guy in a varsity jacket. Things have evolved, and horror is really now nothing more than what we find horrific, something that really shakes us. And Father Flies attempts to do that, and hopefully it succeeds in some ways. But horror is like a roller coaster. You can get higher up and you can get lower down. And of course, it's a matter of taste to some degree, and some people may want their body horror stuff or gore. I'm not so much into that sort of horror. But horror to me is where you can now emotionally pull someone. Let's really get into what scares us, what upsets us, what's chilling. And that's a huge part of what it is to be human. Fear is a huge drive for us. It's how we protect ourselves. It's how we learn.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much more to see in the darkness as well. I remember as a kid when the lights went out, it takes many years, as a young child, of course, everyone's scared of the dark. That's the idea anyway. But eventually you become quite accustomed to it. And I think your imagination can take over. And it's in the darkness that we find some of the most interesting answers about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why I love horror. It really makes people question who they are, how far they'll go, and what scares us. We learn so much from that.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, again, big congratulations for what's happened at Paris. I mean, it obviously went down really well with 2 awards. I mean, so how important is the festival experience for indie films like Father of Flies and filmmakers like yourself?
Well, it's the only important thing, really, because it's what's going to, in some cases, get it distribution, and if not, in some cases it's the only place that some people see a lot of films. Some of the best films I've seen at festivals, and some of them take years then to go to the market, which is insane. It's like the festivals are ahead of the curve, or I don't know. Festivals are very, very important parts of making a movie, and a lot of films don't know their route to distribution. I'm head of production at Goldfinch Entertainment. When I'm not directing my own, I produce movies for a living, and it's amazing how many great ideas we get across our desk that have no route to market and perhaps even considered that. And festivals are a key stepping stone, I think, between that and the market and the rest of the world. Helps filmmakers get some press and some buzz about it as well.
Okay. So obviously, I mean, I can sense where your influences are in this film because there's references all over the place. But I just wanted, I just thought you, who and what are your cinematic influences?
Um, I mean, if we go way back, if we go to the root of it all, I think it was an evening where I was a young kid and I kind of rooted through my stepfather's VHS collection at the time. And I watched in one evening Pasolini's Salo, and accidentally, which was quite gory and shocking for a child of that age to watch. Luckily, my mum was out. Um, and Pinocchio. And in fact, looking back, Pinocchio scared me far more than Pasolini's Salo, far more. I guess that's because it's meant to connect with children, but the horrific images in Pinocchio of the mask, you know, the child that's not a real boy, these mules, these asses that drink booze and turn into children that turn into asses. I mean, it's horrific. And I think still, when I look at my work, it lies somewhere between the grotesque of Salo and the comic effects, the relatability of Pinocchio.
Mm-hmm.
I think somewhere between those two are my
Yeah,
references.
I mean, that's the funny thing. I was thinking about this the other day because I actually did sound on a horror film. We were in this place where you've got these weird kind of dolls and stuff, and they all look quite scary, you know. And it's a Santa, it's a grotto, you know. It's quite crazy. I think this is kids. So,
Yeah.
obviously, now that you've done with Father of Flies, I mean, what's next for you?
I've set up a horror slate at Goldfinch. It's a part of the company called the Number 44, which is named after what Mark Twain called the devil in The Mysterious Stranger. And I can't believe no one's ever set up a slate of horror films after the Number 44. So I've collected a whole great bunch of scripts. We're going to shoot one in Bulgaria in July called The Wheels of Heaven, which is a coming of age story about a young girl that meets a boy who claims he's the devil, but he may just be a human trafficker. You'll have to wait and see. And then we're shooting 3 more at the end of the year, one of which I'll possibly direct and the other 2 I'll produce. And then those stories as well, we've sold to, or certainly done a partnership with a podcast company, and we've created an audio series of podcasts from the horrors, which hits the market in the spring, called 10 Minutes of Terror. And they're essentially 10 minutes of scary stories by the fireside, a bit like Tales from the Crypt for the podcast generation.
Uh-huh. And going to wrap up in a minute, but 2 final questions. What issues and themes are you keen to explore in your future work?
This is a good question. Everything I seem to be drawn towards at the moment, if it's with this slate that I'm referring to, they all seem to be focused on the relationships between one another, between people and between families. And I'm keen to explore that a lot more and why I'm so obsessed with that. You know, I think also we've all come from somewhere. We all have families. We've all had a relationship with somebody at some point, if that's our mother or a sister or a significant other. And that bond as a human being becomes something that I think becomes one of the scariest things for us, to be alone or to lose. The idea of losing a loved one, much like Disney constantly do, you know, how do you scare a kid? You make a child in one of their movies an orphan, and you kill off Mufasa. I quite like that idea, to explore that more. And essentially diverse storytelling. Let's see similar stories but from different perspectives. Storytelling, filmmaking is storytelling, and I think for too long we've been stuck in a rut with feeling the same stories from the same places. And I'm excited for myself, and now seeing other people and other filmmakers in the industry really exploring different perspectives, different kinds of characters, different ethnicities, different genders, telling the same stories from entirely different perspectives. That's really exciting, and that's what film is.
Okay. And finally, what are you most proud of about Father of Flies?
Getting it finished. But I'm at least sad that Nick Tucci never got to see it finished. But I'm glad that I have, and I'm glad his dad's seen it, and I'm glad it's got his name at the end in honor to him.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, Ben, thank you so much for your time and insights today. As mentioned, Father of Flies has just completed its festival run at the Paris International Film Festival 2022, won 2 awards for Best Sound and Best Score. And if you want to look into getting tickets for next year's event, you can go to Paris, www.parisintlfest.com. You can read my review of the film on www.filmandtvnow.com alongside interviews and articles from Paris 2022. You can see a replay of this interview on my official YouTube channel, John Higgins Film Review. Support independent filmmakers, support the cinemas as they continue to reopen. And remember, a film is not just for a festival, but forever. Thank you again, Ben, and thank you all for watching.
Thanks, guys. Nice chatting, John.